In this episode of Archetypes and the Planets, Béa and I explore the upcoming ingress of Pluto into Aquarius. We had a taste of this cycle back in March, when Pluto entered Aquarius for a couple of months before returning back to Capricorn. Some of the themes that were highlighted then were artificial intelligence, democracy versus fascism, medical advances, and the connections these things have to the previous period Pluto was in Aquarius, which was the late 18th century. Now, this coming January 20th, Pluto re-enters Aquarius once again, a sign it will remain in for most of 2024. So the question is, what are we likely to see this time around?
Okay, so Andre, I thought we'd take a little bit of kind of a, I don't know, departure from the series that we've been doing lately to talk about Pluto's upcoming ingress into Aquarius in January of 2024. It already did its first ingress in March, and it was only there for a little while, but I thought we saw some themes that seemed to be showing up again. And then I started looking at, some connections, and I thought we could talk about that, because whenever a planet ingresses into a sign, you'd agree that that's a pretty important thing, right? But Pluto, because of the nature of its 248-year orbit, has not been in Aquarius since the late 18th century. So this is a big deal. It's not, the kind of little thing that happens every once in a while. And so when it went in March, I paid attention, because one of the rules is that you want to know what is happening at the moment that something makes its initial entry. So the one thing, if you remember, going back to March, do you remember the explosion? I mean, it was crazy of talk about AI, right? And specifically ChatGPT. We had all the open AI coming out, and it was a big deal. And you notice how quieted down it came out, and everybody was using ChatGPT, and then somehow, people still are using it, clearly, but the talk about it quieted down, and it's in the air again. And I think it's only going to get stronger if my putting together of this archetypal story makes sense. And I should say that this is one story that's going to come out of Pluto Aquarius. Of course, there are many stories. I just thought we could investigate this particular one because I thought it was interesting. So I'm going to share my I'm going to share this my screen to get us started. Where was the right here we are. So there's the Pluto ingress into Aquarius. It will be on 21st January 2024. About 8 a.m. in the East Coast here. Obviously, but that moment. One thing I noticed is the 00 degree point is kind of a big point, because that's where Jupiter and Saturn met, if you remember, in that conjunction of 2020 that opened up that whole age of air. That was exactly where it was. So I'm wondering if there's any connection to that as well, right? That the fact that 0 degrees point is getting primed again. And maybe there isn't, but I just noted that in December 21st, 2020, that is when Jupiter and Saturn met, and they meet every 20 years. But what was extraordinary is it is starting an almost 200-year cycle where they will be meeting every time in the air element, after meeting for 200 years approximately in Earth. So just noting that, and if you remember that day, and if you remember what happened, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that day, that was, I think, the first time that they actually, the first mRNA shot was actually given to someone that day. I remember it was a nurse, and they showed it, and I thought, oh, that's interesting that it's happening around that time, because that could point to Pluto and Aquarius, bringing, which is something I don't think would be all that hard to understand. It would bring in, some new ideas or new therapies and new medical innovation, which makes sense in a way, because Aquarius is all about innovation. What do you make of that?
You're saying that when Pluto entered Aquarius in 2020, this year, that they correlated with...
No, Jupiter-Saturn, when they...
Oh, the Jupiter-Saturn, back in the time.
So back in 2020, right? December 21st, 2020. I'm just noting that at that 0 degree point, it started a major cycle, when obviously my big interest is in cycles. So that started a Jupiter-Saturn meeting that's going to happen every 20 years in the air element, after 200 years in the Earth. And so that was always a big moment, because you are bringing together two planets in a different element. But it was at that 0 degree point. And I noticed that at that day was that first mRNA shot that the vaccines really helped to solve the huge problem we had in the world at that time. So I'm just wondering if one of the themes, just from that perspective, would be medical innovation. And I should also point out, weirdly, it is the late 18th century, when Pluto's in Aquarius, the Jenner first inoculates someone with cowpox. So the smallpox vaccine has its origins back then as well. So just something to watch out, because I do think we both probably agree that Aquarius is a sign that is very much tied to innovation, right? Of all kinds.
It is, yeah, innovation. And with the Jupiter-Saturn cycles, one of the curiosities is that I think there were maybe a couple of exceptions, but I know one exception was the 1980 when they were in Libra, which is also air, within that Earth cycle period. Most of them are in Earth.
Right.
I know that one was air. Were there any others, or is that the only one?
No. What happens with Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions is there's this weird thing where they conjunct in one element, and then there is kind of like a weird thing where you get a taste of the coming element, which is what happened from 1980 to 2000. And you notice that in that period, we developed, the first period was Saturn, you're developing the hardware. And then the second part of that period, you developed, the World Wide Web comes up. So you see innovation at a huge level between.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So that the air, Jupiter, Saturn, and air signs connects to that, which is what happened, because the 80 to 2000 was the computers and the World Wide Web, software, everything. The Apple, breakthroughs came out of that as well. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as far as the Pluto and the connection to innovation and the vaccines as well, because vaccines, if you look at Pluto discovery in the 1930s, that's when they really came online as well, as a factor. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then AI, Aquarius, I mean, if you're looking for a sign to correlate to computers, you would probably pick Aquarius. This is where I depart a little bit, or maybe a lot, from, I know in some systems of astrology, they don't want to assign co-rulerships of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. I think Uranus, Neptune, Pluto do fit really well with their co-rule signs, and Uranus with Aquarius, to me, makes a lot of sense. I used to resist that until it hit me why. It's the sign of democracy also. I think about Aquarius as the sign of democracy. So yes, it makes a lot of sense that what you said earlier, Pluto, you get the AI discussions earlier in the year, and then the odds that they resume, we're already starting to get quite a few lead-ins, but yeah, that it would resume in a big way in January. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
On the issue of the idea of attributing or having Uranus be the kind of the I'm losing that word. What's the word I'm looking for?
Co-ruler or association too.
So I think if you're looking at a personal chart, it makes sense to have Saturn, because Uranus spends way too long in a period, so it kind of depersonalizes the rulership of that for that particular natal sign. But that it has a flavor, absolutely. There's no way you can't.
Well, I can tell you though that having done lots and lots of personal charts, yes, Saturn is the first ruler, no question. And you'll see events and important psychological patterns when the Uranus does what it's doing in its connection to Aquarius in that chart. That I can verify.
That's interesting. Well. Yeah, I mean, I think what astrologers should do is never. I'm of the Jungian viewpoint that it's both and, it's not either or, right? So you have to keep looking at it. It's ridiculous not to. Okay, so just going back to, so that's what we're talking about today, this moment in time when we get Pluto ingressing back into Aquarius after it did that very briefly for a couple months in March. All right, so what drew my attention, I'm going to sort of take in a little tour, is you might wonder who this guy is. And this guy is named Jeremy Bentham. The reason the way I discovered him is not by studying him directly, but I went to as you know, I did my master's in England at the University of London, and the University College is one of the colleges at the University of London. It's the first one that was actually created, and Bentham kind of was associated with, he was an atheist, and the University of London was basically created as, at the beginning, as a pushback against Oxford and Cambridge because they were really religious, etc. But what's interesting about him is he's way ahead of his time, just completely ahead of his time. So he's born in the mid 18th century, and he is fighting for animal rights. He's fighting for human rights. He's fighting against slavery. I mean, this is a thing that was so completely crazy. In terms, not today, but if you look at position him and the time that he comes from, he's so way ahead of the game, thinking. But he's most known for something called utilitarianism, which is it is the greatest happiness or the greatest number that is the measure of right and wrong, which is very Aquarius to me. Okay, if I think about that, I think that is the thing. Now, this is just as an aside, that auto icon is him mummified, and one of the big jokes when we were at the University of London is that he asked them to mummify him after he died and put him there, and that he was to be taken out, and in any meeting he was to be seated there and be recorded as an extension. He had quite the sense of humor. So it's actually his body. He had somebody actually got to shell him out. Anyway, it's a crazy story. It turns out he was only taken out for one meeting in 2013, but it was one of these things you did if you were a graduate student there, you would go look at this auto icon, it's called, of Jeremy Bentham. But what I really want to point out is, because I think there's a connection to this theory, this philosophy, and what we're seeing today with AI. Okay, so just keep that. And I just want to bring Jeremy Bentham. We do not have obviously a time for Jeremy Bentham, but I just want you to notice, look at the stellium he has in Aquarius, including Uranus in Aquarius. If you're going to go by the fact that it's in his, in one of the signs associated with Aquarius. But he's got Jupiter, he's got Mercury, he's got the Sun, pretty heavily weighted towards Aquarius, right? So this is a man who was exemplifying way ahead of his time, which is, I think, one of the things we associate with Aquarius, the idea that we are thinking in levels that most people are not understanding yet. What's interesting is if you go and you go to see one of the books that the seminal work that he published was, I don't know the exact date, but I put it to his birth date, 1789. You notice that by then Pluto was actually in Aquarius. So it had moved into Aquarius. And just keep this in mind, 1789 is French Revolution. It's the American Revolution has just happened. The Industrial Revolution is going on. We're really talking about a complete reworking. And that's interesting to me, because you would think, well, Uranus should have been in Aquarius. Well, it's actually not. It's Pluto that has come up there and just completely revolutionized, as you say, things like democracy, things like rights, things like, even, and this is where I think that you can tie in Saturn and time. One of the things that sticks out to me is that by 1792, you actually have the revolutionary government in France say, we're not using the same calendars, we're inventing a new time system. And they threw out the old calendars. Suddenly you had to call a month Thermidor. Anyway, it didn't last, clearly, because it was not adopted by everybody else. But you get a real revolutionary kind of thinking, which is why I'm linking it to Bentham. All right, so the reason I started thinking about this is, what is going on right now, which has not been resolved, is there's a huge fight at OpenAI. They kicked out the founder, Sam Altman, and we're in the middle of this, so I don't know how it's going to result. But we're going to look at two charts here, his and Samuel Bankman-Fried, because I think what the philosophy that's at the heart of what's going on is called effective altruism. And that seems to me like one of the themes of Pluto and Aquarius, because what it is you don't worry about doing good to the person that's in the street corner. You're going to game it out mathematically and figure out, how can I best fund something that will give the most benefit to a whole group of people. So if you ever did work in an NGO, you will know, and how working for nonprofits, sometimes they'll pick a very small kind of project and they'll try to address this. This is a very different thing. It's like you really have to sit and think, okay, if my money can hire 20 doctors instead of one doctor, I'm going to go for the 20 doctors. And it doesn't matter. Like, the one would be very particular. Now, for me, I don't know, does that not sound to you like the Aquarius Leo axis, the Aquarius being like the many and the Leo being, well, the individual,
Totally. Okay. Totally. I mean, when you were talking about the Bentham character, it just popped into my mind immediately, because that statement that he made sounds a lot like in the Star Trek movies, the line they gave Spock, Leonard Nimoy, right? And people in acting often end up doing the thing that their chart says they'll do as actors, because that's the message to the world. And Leonard Nimoy was born in that 1931 period with Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto making a T-square. So the Uranus juts out. So he's got a tremendous Uranus near the sun, because he's an Aries. So he's a Uranian character, obviously. And his statement was, at a key moment, he said, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, as he basically died in a room where there was nuclear explosion. And the captain was so upset. Why are you doing this? Because he said, no, I'm not important. The many are more important than the few. Very Aquarian, that you're sacrificing the self. And yet other side of Uranus can be that it enhances a person's individual power within a democracy. That's what democracy is. It's the idea that everyone gets a say, everyone has power, but the group is what is important. The group decides, not the individual. So yeah, absolutely, Aquarius is exactly that. Yes.
And I think there is a danger, and we're seeing it in all these, like you saw yesterday in Argentina, where they elected that lunatic, right? That there is a danger when you're invoking Aquarius, that because this happens with polarity, right? That you'll invoke the very opposite, which is a Leo type. You know, a perfect example, of course, is Trump, who has Mars on, but Leo rising, Mars right on the ascendant, so he's a walking Mars. And then this guy seems as incredibly unhinged. I have not looked at I have not looked at his chart, but he seems, you know, cut from the same cloth, right?
Yeah, it is. Although I would not yet count Argentina as part of the feeling that things are tilting toward the fascist way. Argentina has, first and foremost, a money problem.
It does.
And he can talk all he likes. He's going to have to figure out how to get the money situation. And no amount of conspiratorial thinking or insane thinking is going to help you with that. So I await to see what this guy actually does versus what he said he was going to do, because, you know, none of that makes any sense if he doesn't get the money situation fixed. And it's going to be tough.
No, I know. Oh, I'm not saying he's going to get anything done. I'm talking about the behavior he is already on day one, which is I'm going to jail all the journalists who basically, or get them out of business, who criticize me. That's a very dangerous moment for any democracy. So that's more what I'm speaking about. But, you know, him, like Viktor Orban, there's a whole bunch of them that seem to me very Leo-like. And one thing people should remember historically, because it's going to be in the news big time again, by the way, is that what led after the French Revolution, what happened to France? Who showed up? A total Leo character, which is Napoleon, right? You can't think of a more Leo type character than Napoleon. So I think those two always work. And it's interesting to me that a lot of the right wing in the United States, when I hear them speak, they really don't like democracy. They get upset by democracy. They say, well, we shouldn't have democracy. And so they're, I think, the type of people that would be much more open to a great man theory. I mean, the great man, of course, well, we can all laugh, but you can project that onto anybody, right? So that's more what I'm speaking about, that you can't really have the Aquarius without invoking the Leo. It's coming in, right? In one way or another. And so the more you talk about the group, the more the individual says, my rights, which is exactly what you're seeing right now. And I think it is going to be one of the stories that you're not going to be able to get away from in when that 20-year period where Pluto is in Aquarius. I will also note, and you've talked about this just recently, that China has a very early Aquarius ascendant as well. So you would see that some Pluto action is going to definitely affect China. There's no way out of it, because it's, again, built on collectivist ideals, which is an Aquarius kind of idea, right?
Yeah, that's totally true. And I just don't see, though, when you look at historically the period since Uranus was discovered prior to Pluto, that actually is the demarcation of, that's when the US is formed, for example. And since that point, you know, the Uranus to Gemini, Pluto to Aquarius, that's when democracies became the way the world governs itself by and large. Prior to that, kings and savages and, you know, since then, the group dominates. And I don't see how, you know, some people think, oh, it's all going to now turn into the whole planet will turn into this fascist regime. I don't see that. I see it as a struggle, but going toward the idea of the group continuing to be more powerful than the individual.
I don't necessarily see it as a struggle. I'm just saying that will be what the group has to struggle against, perhaps. This idea of projecting all of this power onto often inadequate, cartoon-like, and very dangerous leaders that will promise them, well, you know, I'll protect you from the big group. And all you're saying when we want protection from a group in a way is that I don't agree with that group's values. But, you know, in any democracy, hey, that's sometimes you're going to have to live through periods where the values are not your values. And, you know, welcome to maturity. Okay, so let's look at this guy, because that's when I started thinking about this. And I know that you and I have talked personally about this guy is Samuel Bankman-Fried. I do think it's funny that his last name is Bankman. I mean, could you make that up? He basically started a huge currency exchange. Anyway, for the people who haven't been following the story, he was the big guy that was being supported by a whole bunch of celebrities because he started this crypto exchange. But at the same time, he also had his own private hedge fund. And it turned out that when they went to look, what was he doing? It was basically siphoning funds illegally from this cryptocurrency exchange to that. It's interesting because I read the Michael Lewis biography that just came out about him, and a couple of things came out, and that's where I got interested in the idea of effective altruism, because I thought, oh, that's what he practiced. He could convince people he was a good guy, and I guess in his mind he is, right, because he was giving his money to causes that he considered very important. He wasn't as much into the money as a Jeff Bezos who's flying around and getting himself pictured on Vanity Fair. And that was not this guy's thing. This guy was really a techie. He would be talking to people and playing video games. Definitely not a social guy, but he understood how to get legitimacy in that world was to get celebrities to back you. And so he built this huge thing that all came really tumbling down. And one thing that was interesting about it, I mean, I think Michael Lewis in this book is too close to a subject and maybe shows much more he doesn't have the separation sometimes that I think you need. But a very interesting psychological profile is that he hated authority. He just basically thought that anybody over 40 didn't understand the world, and only him, being a young guy in his 20s, could understand how things really worked. And this actually was his downfall. If you look at it archetypally, Saturn creates boundaries, it creates structures, it creates the limits that he didn't seem to understand that, because his view is, well, the older people don't understand what should be happening. And he did not listen to people that were giving him advice about you shouldn't be doing this and that. And so I was interested in that philosophy because he embodied it. So let's look at his chart. Disastrously, he decided that he was not going to do a deal with when he was taken down, and he was going to show up and try to defend himself, and he did a terrible job. I mean, just a terrible job. The trial just ended, and I think they found him guilty in about 5 hours, and he's looking at decades in jail for what happened here. So, and of course he's still facing civil suits, and it's terrible. So let's look at his chart to see what could be going on. You notice again the emphasis on Aquarius up there. So you could see why you'd be attracted to something like effective altruism, that there's something about the philosophy, especially because the ruler of his chart, Venus, is sitting in Aquarius, right? So immediately you think, the Aquarian idea.
Yes, the ascendant ruler, right?
Yeah, the ascendant ruler. I'm sorry, what did I say? Yeah, the ruler of the
ascendant. The ruler of, when you say the ruler of the chart, it's the ruler of the ascendant.
Ruler. Yeah, the ruler of the ascendant. So to me, this kind of makes sense that he would have been attracted to that, and it's in the 10th house, so it's very much a high profile kind of story. What do you see? You looked at this chart as well. What struck you?
Well, the Pluto square.
Pluto square Venus, yeah.
So the Pluto square Venus. So a Pluto square. The problem with being young and having a chart like this is that your perception of things is going to more likely than someone that is older be more unconscious of what the outer planets are doing. Right. And so he is a bit of a fascist and a bit of a control freak without Pluto. But he thinks he's not doing that. He thinks that he's just doing what is correct and so forth. But when you play those games where you try to really control something and manipulate it, which is Plutonian as well, it can blow up. It can blow up. You have to get it perfect, and almost no one gets things perfectly. And he maneuvered himself into a horrible spot. Notice, by the way, that this thing when it exploded for him, the Uranus was squaring those Aquarius planets, right, which is telling you that he doesn't have a good control of that force. Even though he may think he does, the fact that you're arrested and charged, or even that everything fell apart essentially under those aspects. And now the Uranus especially continues to it's going to square his ascendant, or no, can join his ascendant and so forth. The other planet that has been really active is Neptune. He has a Uranus. He's born in that Uranus-Neptune conjunction. So Neptune at that age and self-delusion go hand in hand, right? But probably for today's discussion, the most curious thing here is the Pluto energy being wired so tightly to that to that Venus. Yeah.
Right. Well, the other interesting thing, because Pluto Venus, one manifestation, as you know, is relationships, right? And the person who did him in was his ex-girlfriend, who basically did cooperate with prosecutors and who revealed everything. She was running the hedge fund, the Alameda hedge fund, and she came out and she made the deal and said, yes, he was behind all this, because he was denying that he was doing a whole bunch of things which were legal fundamentally. And so it's interesting that it was Pluto Venus. And if you notice, his seventh house is Mars world and it's conjunct Saturn. So I would have been more careful if I knew astrology. I would have said, maybe I would have been a little bit more careful in the way you dealt with the girlfriend.
Yeah, but also the Pluto is in that house. The Pluto is part of that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
The girlfriend becomes the Pluto in that sense.
Yeah, the agent of destruction.
Agent of destruction, yeah.
Or the agent of truth. But again, it's really interesting because he's a representative of that. You know, I look at generations like in the 60s, a lot of us have Pluto Uranus conjunctions. Well, that generation had that Neptune Uranus conjunction, and they're kind of split. You can see, by the way, because remember that Uranus, if you're using it as a co-ruler, you can see that it has an affinity for all those Aquarius planets. And you can see that his philosophy was not about making money. He was very weird. He would hang out in these shorts and sit around playing video games. Like I said, he wasn't particularly interested in accumulation. He really wanted to give money away. That's why he was giving these ridiculous amounts of money to parties that he thought needed it. But that kind of speaks to that Neptune Uranus in Capricorn, the idea that you're not really quite, I think this whole generation is not quite comfortable. You have to merge Neptune, the idea of compassion or a philosophy of giving.
I don't know the full story, but isn't it also true, though, that part of what he did is, that might have been his overview, but didn't he also spend a whole bunch of money that wasn't his? And didn't he also do that as well? He was
the money that he was spending was the one that he was giving to Alameda when it got into trouble, because he was playing around. See, if you read his biography, you get a sense that this is not a person who's materially driven. He's a math geek who loves math problems. Okay, somebody quite astutely said that this boy could have really benefited not from math camp that his parents put him in when he was younger, but maybe having read a little bit of literature and a little bit of philosophy and a little bit of understanding beyond that very limited world he lived in. So he's a person who basically is on the computer all the time. In fact, tellingly, Michael Lewis said he would suffer more. He would rather be poor and locked up anywhere with a computer than now what's going to happen in jail, right? Because what's really going to hurt him is he won't have access to a computer. So very much a part of the world. But he was very early on taken on by this philosophy about affective altruism, which is, I think, at the heart. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we talk about Sam Altman, about the idea that you should be giving back.
By the way, this is a great example of how a really good transit is not exactly really good depending on what's going on. The Jupiter in his chart, it's in Virgo. It's pretty good. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of connections to planets. It's not especially very well wired to his Aquarius planets, because that's that 150. It's not great, but notice that he got himself major hot water through the Jupiter, through his ascendant period, squaring all his Aquarius planets. So Jupiter there didn't solve the problem for him. It basically engineered or was part of the downfall as well, right? So
I would say that the Jupiter there made him hyperinflated about himself and about how he thought he was going to go into a courthouse and convince people that he hadn't done anything wrong. So I think if you have Jupiter on your ascendant, that is a tough
I know a politician who thinks like that too.
I know.
I'm going to wear my Jupiter now. I'll tell them what it is. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, in this case, it was going through. Again, had he spoken to an astrologer, he might have said, take the deal. Maybe talk to the prosecutors, help them out. So I think that would have been part of it. And his Jupiter is not a very helpful planet. It is in detriment. It's not, doing anything.
Well, it opposes the sun too. So he's gonna, the self-inflation. But that's the point, that particularly when you create a scenario like this, which is really, overamped, and, a planet like that is going to bring all the things that don't work within the chart at a moment like this, because the other planets will dominate. The fact that the Uranus was really harsh, the Neptune is not in a good place, because again, to me, he was doing, at that point anyway, major self-delusion around.
Right. Oh, yeah. Very delusional. I think it's also quite funny that this is a guy, crypto seems to be an Aquarian thing, right? And he's got a Venus, he's got a Taurus rising, which I think is associated with money. And this is what he wanted. He wanted to create an exchange where all these people can not be tracked. I mean, I think there's a lot of problem with cryptocurrency that hasn't really even been addressed yet. And also, by the way, we're going through Uranus, going through Taurus. So it's a time when people are thinking of new ways of new currencies, of new ways of, but anyway, I think his chart is such a good example. I should go back to that conjunction that is operative for a lot of the young people who are about 30, 34. I mean, Neptune conjunct Uranus is also Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's people that really do want to bring new systems. It's fantastic. But in this case, that was his idea, but the way he went about it was just completely corrupt. And part of it, and I really think if you read the book, that what the point was, and maybe this is a great argument for, you need support from Saturn. He just he didn't understand how authority in Saturn should work, right? And so he just kept thinking, I am the authority. And no, you're not. That's the thing. I mean, you may not maybe if he had grown to be 40, he would have realized, no, actually, I'm completely confused.
Saturn in the 10th is notorious for delivering social power later. It takes time. Saturn is a delaying type of influence. And so the fact that he, probably because when you talk about Aquarian energy and the Uranus-Neptune conjunction up there in the sky like that, pretty elevated, which suggests earlier success, but then the Saturn becomes a huge problem because he wasn't able to manage it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely. So the other chart we were going to look at is Sam Altman. We do not have a time of birth for him, but he's very much in the news right now. Head of OpenAI, kicked out by his own board. And from what we know right now, this whole effective altruism comes back because it turns out that the board is a nonprofit board that is trying to save humanity from AI, and Sam Altman is monetizing AI. You could see where the problems could come, right? Somebody noted that I put the Mars there because the day of the Mars Sun Cazimi. So the Cazimi is when the Mars is right in the heart of the sun, and it hasn't happened in Scorpio since 1991. So it's not something that happens every day. You note that it fell right where Saturn is, right? So I don't know his time of birth, but that suggests, and he's got Saturn opposite Mars at birth, right? So at the beginning, it looked really bad, but it actually looks like he's the winner in the end because they want him back. I mean, they got rid of him within 2 seconds. Microsoft came in, they put a lot of money into OpenAI. They're going, what the hell are you doing? And it seems now that it's the board that's going to have to resign. And again, we don't have his time of birth, so we can't really go into it a lot. I would notice all that Taurus up there, and again, it's not in the 10th house because we don't know what house it would be in. But it seems to me that he is holding part of the story again, because again, it's brought up this philosophy of effective altruism and humanity concern for. I think it is valid to say that we don't know what AI is going to lead to, so we should be a little bit careful. But the forces of the market are fighting the forces of constraint. And I don't know who's going to win here, but certainly in the first round, I think Sam Altman's going to win. That's what it looks like. And I don't know what that says about this whole story. I mean, are we heading into a disaster?
This one, you can see though that he's got a lot of allies in the transits because the Neptune is helping him in its transit. Being in late Pisces, supporting the late Taurus and late Scorpio, where Saturn is, and then Uranus is squaring is in Taurus, but it's, well, we don't know his birth time, but it's right now it's not really touching anything all that much. But Pluto is fine because Pluto trines that Mars, so that's perfectly good. And Jupiter is in his sign, and so if Jupiter is in your sign and pretty close to his sun as well. It's not always 100% guaranteed, but you've got pretty good odds that the situation will tilt in your favor if something goes wrong, which is what it did. But I can see why he escaped the guillotine.
Well, what's interesting because Jupiter is will station on December 29th at 5 degrees Taurus, so pretty close to that sun. So it's going to be helpful to him still. You do note though this power struggle. Look at that Pluto opposite the sun at birth. So you can see that this is probably not going to be the last power struggle.
No, and next year and the year after, Pluto is in Aquarius precisely driving that opposition. So, and then by the time Jupiter gets out of Taurus into Gemini in the middle of 24, there's no Jupiter, and then that Pluto, it could be a problem.
Yeah,
no question.
Well, it is, and here I mean, you can't speculate, but I wonder if what is not going to happen is, if the and it's still very fluid. We really don't know. I'm going by what Kara Swisher and the people, Professor Galloway, Scott Galloway, who are the people that have the most in on this. So we don't know how it's going to end up. But if it turns out to be an argument between where is this technology heading, and should we be monetizing at that level? My worry is that Pluto's sun that he brings in might reveal that he is hurrying too much, and this is going to impact us all. It's not just going to be, because, when Pluto goes into Aquarius, that's going to be all of us. It's not just going to be him. So I look at charts that will be affected, and he is one of the charts that I'm noting will be affected by that Pluto ingress. Very early, he'll get affected, just like Apple has a very early ascendant. I mean, the Apple chart that when was released into the stock market has a 3-degree ascendant in Aquarius. China has that early. So you're looking at that already. Who might be affected by this ingress? And those three just jump out at me. I don't know if you can think of anybody or anything else, any entity that has a very early Aquarius rising.
That's pretty big. What you've mentioned, China, Apple, because they're early Aquarius rising. This guy, and don't forget that when you've got Pluto situation, it's also prime territory. If you've been doing something dirty in the background of any other area, it could pop out on you and become a huge problem and take you out that way. So, but that he's likely to be in the news and be a major force, because of that square, for sure.
Something will be happening. We don't know how. It's interesting to me, just when I looked at the Apple and the China chart, I mean, you located an earlier time, which makes sense. But they're still close to where the Apple ascendant is as well. You notice that Apple really had all their workforce. I mean, who's making the computers, right? So when you look at this, you can't make this stuff up. It's like so completely tied that that somehow their fate is sealed together in some small or big way.
And by the way, to your point about the polarity of Aquarius Leo and the push and pull between the having like an emperor, Napoleon style, although that didn't succeed. I mean, he had his run
back for a while, for a long time.
Right. But China is a really great example of that, because China is a sort of pseudo. It's not really a democracy. It's a communist system where communism, in a way, aligns with Aquarius as well. It's the people. It's just that it's pretending that they've got a strong central figure who made himself ruler for life. He decides everything. So they have that Napoleon figure running the place. I honestly think that that's not going to do well in this century. It's the opposite of what China thinks, because Aquarius, in the end, is the technology that links people throughout the world. And we're not talking 1940 when you could hide things. Now it's so difficult. Yes, you can create fakes and all that, but then you can create counter programs to tell you that they're fake. I mean, it's a big problem when everything is being monitored everywhere. Good luck with that, trying to keep people away from what is going on. And that's China's problem, as I see it.
Oh, I agree. So I think that's one of the countries we want to be looking at, because Pluto's transformation, you're not going to leave. If it hits the ascendant, there's no way it's going to stay the same. So it'll be interesting to see what happens once that hits. That's just one of the ways I think you can learn about cycles, is just look at what places or people have those planetary cycles activated at that time.
Yes, true.
And then, things generally happen, right? So
anyway, they always do.
Right, they do. We like them not to, but sometimes they do. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. I think that will be only one of the issues that will come up with Pluto and Aquarius, but I thought it was interesting to revisit it now because it is so highlighted. And to me, it seems like, yes, because it's moving back in there, it already showed up. I don't think this is the end of the story when it comes to the Pluto and Aquarius, the open AI story. I think there's more to be found out, and God knows what will come out. But I do think that looking back, that's when I thought Bentham, this sounds like Bentham. And then I went and I looked at that chart and I thought, oh my Lord, Aquarius all over the place, right? And every sign has a shadow side. So the very positive part of Aquarius is that it is so incredibly capable of thinking of the humanity as a whole and not just me. The shadow, that's the positive. The shadow side is that it tends to forget the individual sometimes, and in some cases you do have to focus on the individual. Not all cases, but you have to balance that out in some way or another. I will end by saying that, of course, as you know, my work is all around Jung's archetypal theory. Jung was an Aquarius rising with Sun in Leo. I think he knew how to play that if you think about it, he was playing that, and he had Saturn in Aquarius, by the way. So he was really strongly representing that dynamic in his own life, in his work. You can see it everywhere. He always talked about, do not forget the individual, because the individual is at the heart of the whole story. But at the same time, you got to weigh the whole thing. So anyway, fascinating stuff. Yeah.
That's right. Fascinating indeed. Yeah.
Okay, until next time.
Right. Bye, everyone.